My name is Jagdish Krishnaswamy. I'm with the School of Environment and Sustainability at IHS. And my background is in ecohydrology and landscape ecology. So we have a treat in store for us, but I just want to open with a few things about urban ecology and biodiversity. This is an emerging area of scholarship and discourse in India, and a large part of the scholarship and practice comes from actually the semi-wild and rural parts of India in the past. And now that's shifting given the rate of urbanization. And when we look at cities as a unique and novel ecosystem by themselves, this is where some of the complexities come in. If you look at our ecology and conservation experience in the semi-wild parts of the country, it was about setting aside areas. So basically, land sparing, because your national park sanctuaries, tiger reserves, all of them are setting aside land, restricting access to people. And so the burden of conservation often fell on people who are fairly marginal and dependent on those resources. And the benefits of conservation were distributed unequally across sections of society. So that has changed, and it's not exactly black and white like that. There have been opportunities that have emerged from things like ecotourism. Now, when we come to the urban ecosystems were often, in some sense, not seen as arenas for ecologists to engage with, because most of our ecologists were working in semi-wild areas. Now, with the cities coming, cheek by jowl with neighboring ecosystems, but also the realization that cities are unique ecosystems by themselves. So if you look at, for example, the paradigm of urban ecology, which the Baltimore School of Urban Ecology came up with, they looked at three phases or three parts of urban ecology discourse and practice. One was, when ecologists come into the city, they're looking for nature that they're familiar with, the ecological mechanisms that they're familiar with elsewhere. So that's called ecology in the city. So they're seeking things that they're familiar with elsewhere and trying to look for it within the city. So you'll see a scholarship that emerged on looking at biodiversity spaces within the city, whether it's in Delhi or whether it's in Bengaluru or elsewhere. Then the next phase is our realization that because of the juxtaposition of built and unbuilt spaces, the distribution of resources, energy, water, and the people nature interactions that are quite unique in the city, including the proliferation of pigeons, rodents, free ranging dogs, cats, the number of exotic trees that we bring into the city. Because people like to grow lots of different types of plants in the city. So cities have emerged as a very unique and novel ecosystem with a lot of complexity. And the ecological assets that we often see in the city across the country are often the legacies of sometimes pre-colonial, colonial, and then post-colonial periods. And so there's an environmental history and a legacy that we need to be conscious of. Furthermore, because of the competition for space, uh, conservation and restoration in the urban is increasingly has a particular, it's set in a particular political, ecological, and social justice context, as well as an emerging political economy around nature-based solutions, which involves the private sector, government, funding agencies, and possibly with all sorts of impacts on communities that are already residing in the spaces which are now being converted into areas for restoration and conservation. So with that, I just want to start our very interesting panel, which covers diverse issues from urban forests to lakes to the big cats, which are on literally on the peripheries of some of our cities and towns. Also looking at heritage infrastructure, because nature and culture go often very well together in the urbanizing context, and also looking at how wetlands and ecological transitions are happening. So this is a excellent, I think, set of case studies. And whenever we are looking at each of these case studies, we have to keep in mind the political, economic, and ecological justice angles, as well as, of course, the biophysical richness of each of these challenges and emerging opportunities. So with that, I'm going to ask Charlotte to start her presentation, A More Than Human Chronopolitics of Coimbatre's Urban Forests.
Morning, everyone, and I absolutely feel no pressure to be the first presenter today, but I would like to start off by saying that I feel really happy and welcome to be back at IHS. So I'm Charlotte. I'm a PhD candidate in human geography at FU Berlin. And for my PhD, I'm tracing the politics and process of urban greening, specifically in Coimbatore. And the idea is to sort of delineate a lively political ecology of urban forests. My fieldwork traces afforestation projects and the ways in which it reorders relationship between humans, trees, and other beings in a space which is activated by both modalities of entrepreneurial urbanization, but also more than human agency, right? So just the last point that Sir hinted on, right? To look at both the political, ecological, and the biophysical dimensions in these ecologies. All right, so, but in this particular presentation, I would focus on excavating the techniques of the Miyawaki Forest Project, which is a close-range afforestation that is presently being adopted by NGOs, I think, all over in many cities of India, but also elsewhere. And I'm specifically drawing from data in Coimbatore. And you can decide whether you would like to generalize this to other cases or not, right? And just to very briefly talk about the Miyawaki method, this was introduced by Akira Miyawaki, a Japanese botanist. It's a close-range afforestation method, which means plants are planted really densely alongside each other, and usually native species are planted in urban pocket forests, right? In small parcels of land in urban areas. Where do I point this? Okay, now it works. Oh no. So do I tell you when I want to this side? Ah, okay, great. Cool. So starting with like a quote from my fieldwork, I asked an NGO practitioner, NGO practitioner rather asked me, like, do you know what a Miyawaki forest? And I was like, yes, sir, I'm aware. And he's like, it's about making our own forests in no time. So then I figured there's something about time going on about the creation of Miyawaki forests. Perhaps I just ask you to switch the slides. Would that be better? Can you go back to the previous slide now? Really? Okay. Cool. I think this quote by Rishi, who's regional coordinator of a Rotary Club, really sort of hits the point because he really lays down the three different motivations for using the Miyawaki method, right? He says, there are a few simple reasons to do the Miyawaki method. Number one, since you can plant close to 10,000 trees in an acre of land, in urban areas, land is expensive. When you're planting here using conventional methods, we cannot have more than 1,000 trees, and here you can plant 10,000 trees. Second, of course, because of the Miyawaki method of afforestation, growth is 10x or even 20x. The trees grow faster. And third, most important point, you don't need to take care of the forest forever. In a conventional forest, you need to tend to the plants much longer. Here, in 2 years' time, you have a fully grown forest. Beyond that, it needs no maintenance, and the forest is self-sustainable. Because you plant so many trees in a small area, it is easier to maintain in a way. I would spend some time unpacking each of these. But here you see that the key motivations are to plant more saplings. The trees are growing faster, right? So this idea of speed, and then also the idea of less maintenance. So I'm planning to sort of unpack the temporal motivations underlying each of these three reasons that was mentioned to me by Rishi. In order to do this, I draw on key informant interviews, repeat interviews over the period of 10 months from 2021 to 2025, actually. Site visits with project managers because they're really well aware of the temporal dimensions of the forest because they supervise the task in the creation and maintenance of the Miyawaki forest. I also conducted participant observation with laborers and sound recordings, which I will not be getting into for this presentation. Okay, there's a bit of a... All right, to look into sort of the literature on temporalities of urban sustainabilities, I would rather say that it remains an underlying theme rather than being upfrontly pointed out. So there's a lot of literature on urban sustainability transitions or living labs, and there's talk on fast policy and policy mobilities on how models and best practices such as Miyawaki methods travel across different case studies. Here we also talk about how leapfrogging into green urbanism is seen as a measure of modernity. So there is an idea of sort of progress and speed underlying these sort of transitions. However, in order to explicitly tease out the temporal dimensions, I would be using the concept of chronopolitics, which is the relationship between the political behavior of individuals or groups and their time perspectives, right? And also specifically to talk about chronocracy, which is the discursive and practical ways in which temporal regimes are used in order to deny coevalness and thereby create deeply asymmetrical relationships, either between humans themselves or between humans and other than humans. Yeah, so, how do you use your perspectives of time or your ideas of the present and past and future in order to shape specific pathways into the future, right? And how does this sort of create inequalities, either amongst humans themselves or with other beings? I'm going to skip this slide, but just a very quick point from literature that sometimes it's also rather unhelpful to sort of draw these boundaries and say that, oh, the urban is fast and the rural is slow and so on, but rather to look at sort of the interconnections and sort of the discordant and convergent temporalities that are sort of intertwined in the urban space. Let's come back to this very interesting quote by Rishi, right? And the three factors, temporal limitation factors that he talked about. And let's first look at planting close to 10,000 trees, right? Like you can plant more trees if you plant it close to each other in a dense area. And this is where I want to talk about, I want to tease out the sort of enumerative arboreal practices that are used in afforestation methods. I argue that planting a large number of trees fits very well with the policy sprints and the discourses around planting, which emphasizes a lot on the politics of counting. I was made privy to this politics of counting that I'm talking about as in my field work, I witnessed how the forest department would sort of rush into the NGOs and ask them to report all the samplings that were planted in the Miyawaki forest to be part of their dashboards, right? And so it not only aligns with sort of the provincial and the national sort of forest cover increase missions, right? I'm going to really rush through a lot now, but also with multilateral environmental conventions such as the Bond Challenge. And we also see how the sort of money is pumped into greening based on the annual funding dispersal cycles of, organizations which have to do CSR work, or even the occasional birthdays and anniversaries of affluent funders. So this is how I look into how the periodicities of capital, periodicity of policy sprints really end up aligning with the temporalities of urban nature. The second point is about survival of the fittest, because if you remember the quote, he said that the trees would grow faster. And how does it happen? By spurring interspecies competition. So when you plant trees really close to one another, what happens is that they have to fight for resources and sunlight. So they use more of the energy for the vertical growth within the forest rather than spending the energy on other parts of the trees. And so this sort of mimics natural succession, but aims to speeden it up. So there's this idea of how vegetal speeds are seen as very slow as opposed to anthropocentric speeds. So Miyawaki mentions how a period of more than 100 years is too long for us. We cannot wait that long to create forests. We need faster forests, right? So there's this idea of speed being the direct intervention of greening projects and ecological engineering. And just a quick note that this draws on Darwinian notions of interspecies competition, where Darwin also draws from Adam Smith and Malthus, and we believe in the scarcity of resources, and thus we must fight for each other and only the best will survive and so on. The third factor in temporal limitation is about maintenance, because, like I mentioned, Miyawaki, the Miyawaki forest practitioners mentioned how you don't need to maintain the forest forever, because Miyawaki himself wrote in his later pieces directly to practitioners, telling them how they don't need to maintain the forest forever. It will take care of itself. There's this assumption of balance of nature and harmony in nature once you have done, the first steps right. And so I think the Miyawaki makes for a good project, because I'm here drawing from Monica Krause's work, where she talks about how project log frames lend rationality and coherence to a project. You have the aims, the objectives, you have the beginning, the end, and so on. Similarly, in a Miyawaki project, there's a 2-year intervention followed by an abrupt exit, which lends a sense of coherence to this project. And also this discourse around antipodal transformation of before and after. So before it was a barren land, and now it's this forest, and so on. I think maybe I should skip the second point here, which is about offsetting maintenance. But really quickly, NGOs also chose sites in which the infrastructure was set up much faster, so they didn't have to go and do the legwork and extend their project timelines. So not only was speed the object of greening interventions, but it was in some sense necessary to even kickstart these interventions. Just to focus on the second half of this quote, Rahul, who is really well known for his sort of Miyawaki projects in this region, he was telling me, like, we did avenue planting a lot before this, and nobody really saw the results or noticed it. And now we do Miyawaki, and the result is very obvious within 6 months. And he mentions how this is really the reason for people to take it forward in large numbers. There are other sort of elements going on, like I mentioned, right? There are elements of temporal and teleological disobedience, both from human and other than human angles, which I will not get into. But I would just jump to the question. I think a lot of you might be wondering what really happens in the forest now. Like, how do things hold together? Of course, we see a dense forest, and which has grown much taller than we would expect for a 2-year-old forest. But the ecologists and the environmentalists I interacted to, they also had some criticisms of the Miyawaki forest. And they mentioned how there's a thin girth. So DBH is a measure, like the diameter at breast height, is usually not as thick as it's supposed to be. So the forest just focus all of its energy in growing tall, right? And also their usual fruiting and flowering circles are affected. At the forest level, there's a high level of mortality. So think about the counting of number of saplings. And also the question of self-sustenance of the forest in the long term is questioned by many ecologists. In terms of urban health at the larger scale, we all know that biomass is the main factor to calculate carbon sequestration. So of course, the loss in the girth of the trees need to be considered in our sort of evaluation of how much these ecosystems would sort of produce effects for urban health. Just a quick point. And we also see that there's more of a focus on tree planting and canopy rather than like the overall ecosystem of the forest or the overall health of the forest. My conclusion slide, we see how these aspects of temporal compression and limitation, they render the Miyawaki Forest project as transportable and scalable across different contexts. But we note that there's a lopsidedness of more than human relations because we really enlist plant stress, which is created as a result of interspecies competition in order to create this quick biodiverse forest. We also note some convergences and divergences between the periodicities of capital and nature. And with that, I end my presentation. Thank you very much.
So India is pretty unique amongst all the countries in the world in having large cats, depending on which part of the country you're in, whether it's Asiatic lions in Gujarat or leopards and tigers in almost all of the peripheries of all of our cities. And this is a big challenge for us to manage this coexistence. So I would now like Shramana, who's online, to talk to us about a very interesting case study from Bhopal. Growing urban wildlife habitats, interpreting spatio-temporal dynamics of tiger habitats in Bhopal's urban fabric. Shramana, could you join?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Shramana Ghosh, and I'm doing my master's in urban design from School of Planning and Architecture, Bhopal. So basically, this research paper came out from a subject, which is called landscape urbanism. So we try to delve into the aspects of how urban spaces correlate with the landscape feature in a broad aspect. So my topic, my research tries to explore the interaction between urban growth and tiger habitats in Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh, and this work delves into the spatial temporal dimensions of tiger movement and their coexistence with urban fabric. So, as we know, Bhopal has come up to become a city where tigers thrive. It is also correlated to the symbol of biodiversity, but then we also come to notice that they are facing severe challenges due to habitat loss and urban encroachment. In Madhya Pradesh, this acts as a critical biodiversity hotspot, and Bhopal offers a unique case of harmonious coexistence between urban areas and wildlife. And Bhopal specifically has accepted the urban tigers and its presence and have kind of like created a symbiotic relationship with them. And simultaneously, the tigers have also they made themselves habitable within the urban environments. So the study will try to uncover the factors that enable this balance. Habitat islands, which can be said as isolated natural patches which surround the urban matrix, can also be noticed to be visibly present within the urban fabric as well. But due to rapidly urban growing population and competing land uses, areas that used to be continuous habitat have become fragmented and disconnected from each other. So as the cities start growing outward, the fragmented forests and natural habitats try to they sort of become like an isolated islands within the urban sprawl. Hence, this phenomena can isolate plant and animal population, which are contained within them, and this can also increase, like in the survival aspect of these plants as well as animal species, the pressure increases in competition for food and space. As we know, India is like one of the 12 mega biodiversity nations, according to Zoological Survey of India. In the 12 mega biodiversity nations of the world, and according to the Tiger Census report, published in 2023, Madhya Pradesh was crowned as the Tiger State of India. Coming to the aspects of urbanization, habitat fragmentation, and wildlife ecology, the growing concern is obviously the shrinking isolated habitats. And this kind of is like overlapping with the physical characteristics of the city with the natural habitats, which it is surrounded by. And because of alternate land use matrix and the growing urban fabric, urban sprawl basically, it kind of poses a challenge of the survival for of this key species in a long-term variation. If we talk about tiger and its terrestrial ecosystem, India is like home to 75% of tiger population in the world. And specifically, if we talk about Madhya Pradesh, it holds 6 designated tiger reserves, all overlapping with the nation, with the city's peripheral boundary. And we know that tigers' presence in a biodiversity factor can create like multiple ecological benefits, like it supports livelihood, it also protects the protects as well as influences the area, the natural ecological and forest protection, as well as it also helps in mitigate the climate because of its presence, its habitual nature of interacting with the forest land, and its food eating habits. So when we look into Bhopal, it has reported no significant conflict over the years. Uh, it stands as as an example of man-animal coexistence. So how is that? When we look into the tiger behavior and urban habitat preferences, so basically, if you look into the tigers' behavioral pattern, they are solitary and elusive animals, and they generally avoid human spaces and basically busy areas, which are the urban sprawls. But now, according to there is this one person, DP Srivastav. He has been very much aligned with the nature of how tigers are living in Bhopal's periphery, specifically Bhopal's case study. And he has come to the revelation that the urban tigers are now becoming capable of adapting to urban environments. And they are navigating the city periphery stealthily and using the peripheral boundary and its natural landform to its benefits of movement. So they are, so if we look into the rhythm of the city and how the tigers are moving around, they are nocturnal, they are becoming nocturnal, and they are avoiding direct interaction with people by moving in the night. And during the day, they retreat to the hidden caves and secluded spots, which emerge at night, which are present. So if we know what we know about tigers are that female tigers basically require a minimum territory size of 15 to 20 square kilometers, and male territories have a larger span area, which is around 60 to 100 square kilometers. When we look into the nature of the habitat and forest cover, the tigers want to explore in search of new territorial grounds. They look for dense forested areas, which are a mix of evergreen and deciduous trees. They also look for the water and prey is an essential feature, and presence of wetland ecosystems adjacent to water sources, which also attracts prey species. So it helps them in the sustenance of their hunger. Then we look into the settlement density, the presence of like permanent settlements, which are particularly around agricultural areas and forest fringes. They are a source of prey as well. And when we look into how the road network system of the city helps into the habitual nature of the urban tigers, the road network's presence helps in the movement of acts as a movement corridor. So as we see that because these are becoming fragmented, the dense forests are becoming fragmented, the road networks act as a key connector between two forest patches for the tigers to move around the city. Then we look into the land use trends in Bhopal, which is seeing a pattern of green cover loss and urban sprawl over the 30-year Google Earth map study, which I did. It shows that there's a major decrease in the southwest part, which is followed by the southeastern part of the city. But we can see that comparatively in the northern region, it sees a less decrease in green cover. Whereas in the central area, it's entirely devoid of green areas. But we know that there are presence of the Bhoj wetland as well as the One Vihar, which acts as one of the fragmented habitat island within the city itself. So after like around 2005, the land use change in Bhopal, it saw like 1,000 hectares of uh, uh, green belt, botanical gardens, city parks, as well as agricultural land. Basically, lands being converted for recreational purposes or public semi-public purposes. These were the changes which were seen in the land use. When we look into the Bhopal development plan of 2031, the zones around which the natural habitats and as well as the water bodies and forest patches exist, they have been turned into public, semi-public properties, which basically will convert into mixed-use development, residential as well as agricultural farmlands. These kind of developmental changes through the land use development plan, it risks the ad hoc urbanization around, specifically around the eco-sensitive zones, which are like harming the naturally rich landscape of the city periphery. And the three key factors which was identified through this land use map study was that many of the barren forest land, we won't call it barren because nothing is barren per se. Every land has some kind of ecological system taking place, well, whether it be marshy land or a grassland. So many of these lands are converting, and they have converted into developable land. They are trying to introduce agricultural sector into those domains and using and trying to incorporate multi-use development within those land use, which are obviously coming to the challenges of unregulated urban expansion, encroachment in eco-sensitive zone, and lack of comprehensive urban policies which can integrate with the wildlife integration. To do a holistic measure of how habitat balance coexists for the urban tigers. Water, land, green cover, and urban intensification are are four key major areas of spatial of the space which should be studied. Basically, overlapping these four particular areas and trying to understand like what are the factors which help urban tigers move within the city fabric or on the periphery of it. So, while studying these four layers, it was also noticed that the Madhya Pradesh Environmental Policy, which was last published in 1999, it mentioned that the diversion of agricultural land for non-agricultural purposes was only done when it is necessary, and conservation of pastoral land as well as creation of protected area network. These were the only reasons onto which an agricultural land could be converted for something else. But as we saw earlier, in the city development plans have completely missed out on the point, and they have introduced public and public development within these degraded forest lands, and which has led to loss of agricultural lands in the vicinity of the forest. So these agricultural lands not only act as a buffer between the city fabric as well as the forest, but it also acts as
Sharmana, you have to wrap up
a first
quickly.
line of defense. Yes, sure. So coming to the spatial temporal analysis, this is the map which shows how tigers primarily move within these patches. These tiger sighting, as you can see in the red dots, they have been generated through numerous newspaper articles and the research done by D.P. Shrivastava. And based on this, in this research paper, I had tried to identify which were the landforms onto where the urban tigers were identified. So there are three specific patches specifically concerned around the periphery of Bhopal city. And as you can see that this is not only limited to the periphery of the city, but as well as extends towards the wildlife sanctuaries and a lot of lakes and water bodies and water streams which exist around the city as well. So these are the major landform factors which helps tigers navigate. So
Ramana, you have to quickly, just a couple of
yes,
seconds.
I'm just about to. So under the three patches, the second patch, as you can see in the middle, so this is the Kerwa Kalya zone, where the mix of land holdings is visible. Here, the villages practice agriculture, and there are also schools and college plots which are present over there because of the public-private land use development. So this particular patch, which is around 5 kilometer by 5 kilometer area. So this total area had shown the maximum number of tiger sightings, and it is also a suggestion that this particular area can be converted into a small sanctuary or a protected land parcel. So concluding this presentation, there are three specific zones, three specific areas which we're focused on, which we can focus on while while the concern of tiger habitats with the urban fabric is into play. So first is the integration of sensitive urban planning for wildlife conservation, which looks into the importance of land use recovery and the development of wildlife corridors to reconnect these fragmented habitats. The second one is policy and collaborative imperatives. Here we look into initiatives that support trophic cascades and which also ensures ecological balance of predator-prey relationships. And the third one is a model for sustainable urban futures. So here we look into Bhopal's experience, which highlights the potential for urban areas to contribute to incrementing forest cover and help into the ecological balance. So Bhopal not only acts as a growing urban.
Shramana, we have to stop now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I'll wrap this. Thank you.
So now we come to Namuru, Bengaluru. We have a study of Bengaluru's lakes and how power shapes them. So Sanjana.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. And I'd first like to thank the IHS team for organizing this timely and relevant event and choosing my paper to be part of these discussions. I also like to thank Professor Solomon Benjamin. I think some of you here must be familiar with him. And it is under him I completed my master's thesis, which forms the backbone of the research I present to you today. So situating my research, we kind of went over some of the things with, Mr. Aromar's speech, but it can be argued we live in the era of the Anthropocene today. We're witnessing a rapidly urbanizing world, and we're also, at the same time, especially in the global south, and we're coupled with the crisis of environmental degradation and climate change. So policymakers are now grappling with the necessity to urbanize with nature rather than through its depletion. And coming from the field of humanities, I'm responding to this context using the calls of scholars like Stacey Alaimo, for taking up the mantle of producing more grounded framings of urban ecology to take seriously questions of power and how it shapes nature and its conservation, and to reveal the embeddedness of ecology, situating it in history, politics, land contestations in our transitioning cities. So I'd just like to go over some of the theoretical groundings drawn predominantly from the fields of critical geography and political ecology. Assemblage is a theory which helps us see nature not as something fixed, but as actually something continually produced through relationships between different actors. And from there, I moved to the essay Ideas of Nature, which actually examines some of these ideas and how these assemblages are formed in the Western canon. And as post-colonial subjects, I think we have a lot to gain from critically examining how some of these Western framings still affect us today. Williams critiques the nature-culture binary, highlighting that the idea of nature contains, though often unnoticed, an extraordinary amount of human history. He traces us through different conceptions of nature, as divine goddess, a selective breeder, as pristine, unpeopled wilderness, as a savage and unruly thing to be contained and tamed. These conceptions have a heavy legacy in what came to be known as the fortress conservation model, exemplified by Garrett Hardin's Tragedy of the Commons. He was consumed by Malthusian anxieties of population pressures on nature and said the only way to safeguard nature amidst these population pressures was to either privatize it or strictly regulate access to these pristine landscapes against the threats posed by encroaching local populations. Such a model continues to have a legacy in conservation today and pits the local population against nature. However, in strong opposition to these models, there have been works pioneered by scholars like Elinor Ostrom, who sees nature as a common pool resource, which documents how populations living around a lake can successfully conserve and manage it through bottoms-up sustainable use. I believe this represents a positive shift in our recent discussions on conservation. However, I still think there are critical gaps, especially when we speak about nature in our cities. I argue here that local populations, predominantly nature-dependent and poorer citizens of our cities, continue to remain invisible, excluded, tokenized, or villainized in the narratives of urban nature conservation and climate action unless we seriously address certain critical gaps. And here are 3 strands of literature that helped me think through some of these thoughts. And I just want to share this with you. And I think thinking about it on these strands can help us move from inclusive on paper to inclusive in practice. So the first one is to critically examine what we mean when we say civil society. So John Harris calls this form of associational politics, predominantly adopted by the urban middle class and the elite, as new politics, and characterized more by problem solving and couched in the language of efficiency rather than democracy, which he believes is necessarily messy and involves quote-unquote dirty politics. Such a politics tends to exclude the urban poor as active agents, even as these organizations may be claiming to work on their behalf. Closely related is hijacking what is known as public interest, and here Amita Bhaviskar's concept of bourgeois environmentalism is quite helpful here. The urban elite, she claims, hijacks what is constituted as public interest using narratives of good governance, rule of law, order, cleanliness, world-class aesthetics. And these concerns end up negating and even villainizing some of the concerns of the urban poor. Such concepts also, have some reverberations of some of these colonial and ways of thinking about our cities and thinking about nature. Now, I take some of these insights into spatial and land politics, drawing on the works of Ince, Benjamin, and D'Souza. They see the frameworks of commons development as an attempt to fix the fluidity of nature, essentially bringing nature into the fold of capitalist real estate. And, you might say, with this urbanization, this is sort of unavoidable in some ways, but what they want us to remember is this fixing, what it ends up doing is it ends up displacing either spatially or, through access of resources, some of the populations from the access to resources they used to have. And it also tends to delegitimize the ways in which the urban poor tend to access land and nature. Here, Solomon Benjamin's concept of occupancy urbanism is quite helpful. It takes seriously the ways in which different groups claim land outside the form of the master plan. We all live in cities today that, predominantly urbanization is happening outside these planned areas. And so, what helps is to, instead of just viewing them as encroachment, corruption, vote bank politics, and dismissing them, this occupancy urbanism takes those forms, especially the forms adopted by the urban poor, as legitimate and, takes them seriously. Okay. No, I think one slide before. Yeah, okay. With this, I'd like to briefly go over my 2 sites, and just the fieldwork that I've done was predominantly done in 2021. But we have the Hebbal Lake, which is the Lake Development Authority formed in 2002 by the Karnataka government. It was a parastatal set to develop the lakes using a public-private partnership model. And EIH was one of the first, it was the first PPP lake model that kind of emerged. And and then the civil society groups of Bangalore kind of protested against what they saw as the privatization of commons. And this eventually led to the dissolution of LDA, and the lakes of Bangalore went into management of the BBMP. And today, several of these lakes are managed in the resident welfare associations or other civil society organizations in partnership with the BBMP are managing a lot of these lakes today. And Kaikondrelli Lake was one of the first kind of successful models and it's touted as a sort of community-led initiative. And I thought, these two are sort of couched in the framings of both Hardinian models and Ostromian models. And I thought that's why it's a good, good 2 sites to gain these insights. So due to the paucity of time, I'll, hold to 2 main insights here for my theory and fieldwork. The first is the point I want to emphasize on how Keres got turned into Bangalore's lakes. So the water bodies of Bangalore are Keres. So they're essentially irrigational tanks shaped by, the labor and the hydrology of the land. And in a rural setting, a Kere would tend to fall under the jurisdiction of the Gram Panchayat and associated with various land-use based tenure types like Gadde Jameen, Gomala Jameen, and labor-based inams. As the land gets urbanized, the Kere begins to come under centralized control. Either the Forest Department, the Lake Development Authority, or the BBMP, depending on which time period we're talking about. Conversion of tenure into public lands from these kind of common land tenure types, tends to allow for consolidation, making the land available for real estate purposes. The Kere's fluid seasonal land use based boundaries gets converted into a sort of this gets ring bundled, and the lake gets dredged often to create a water bowl effect, essentially containing the lake in and freeing up rest of the wetland for other purposes. In Hebal, for example, the area where the flyover stands, and if you've come in through the airport, you've seen that flyover, you've gone on that flyover. That area used to be a paddy, where paddy was grown during the wetland season, and several of those Lakeview apartments and in both Kaikondali Lake and Hebal Lake came through fixing, manicuring, and improving the carries into lakes. While the landed castes tend to benefit from the real estate speculations that come with transitioning a village into a city, the local groups that depend on these common lands tend to lose out on their claims and often get cast as encroachers. And I now use three main examples to showcase how the bourgeois civil society politics ended up playing out in both of these lakes. So most of Bangalore's lakes you might have seen have this thing called a bird island in the center, and Hebal being one of the first that got this, this island. These human-made islands serve the interests of the recreational bird watchers to have a place of pristine nature away from human interference, but created through human interference. The Bestru are a community from the Hebal village that still fish in the lake unto today, and they inform me that the creation of these lakes severely disrupted the aquatic life, and the lake bed has still not recovered unto today. And with the increased bird population, it affected their livelihood, with birds now eating up half the fish in the lake. Kaikondali Lake, while touted as more inclusive and definitely had a lot more stakeholder consultations with the village during the lake development process, still has a bird island, and you can still see it today. And additionally, from my fieldwork, while we saw the traditional activities being highlighted in several of the discourses, there's even a film made, there are no actual traditional activities happening in the lake anymore. So what I want to argue is that while there were stakeholder consultations, no real decision-making power has been transferred to the local community, due to which they lost out on their livelihood claims. Lastly, on one of the flanks of Kaikondali Lake is a migrant laborers colony. Recreational users often complained about how the discharge of sewage from the colony was polluting the lake. The owner of that land was a local goon, they said, and nothing could be done. They were powerless. However, upon closer conversations, I realized that, most of the high-rises around the lake were discharging sewage into it. However, since the world-class city aesthetics of the bourgeois, the migrant colony clashed the most with that aesthetic, I argue that they ended up becoming the environment villains here and bearing the disproportionate ire, potentially, for relocation and, different various areas of that. And even though the elite are equally complicit in creating this situation. So with this, I'd like to come to the end of my conversation, and I'm happy to continue this discussion. I think there's still a lot more to explore in this, but I hope I've raised a few questions. This research helped me question a lot of my own assumptions, and I hope this presentation can play a part in helping raise some questions that can help us move towards more inclusive bottom-up frameworks. So thank you.
Thanks, Sanjana. So botanical gardens in cities are often places which connect people and the nature outside from all over the world. And so the next talk is going to look at culture and nature together. So request Ghazal to talk on recalibrating heritage infrastructure in cities.
Good morning, everyone. This is architect Ghazal Nanwani and architect Path Jamadar presenting the research titled Recalibrating Heritage Infrastructure in Cities through Hybrid Ecological Programs, Promoting Cultural, Digital, and Biological Diversity. Most of this work that I would be presenting today was done during my master's thesis at CEPT, and some of it is student work that was carried on at CEPT while I was co-teaching. I think I would hand it over to Path to continue.
So with technological advances, human demands and its related infrastructure have been in a constant flux, leading to an ever-changing urban fabric. This precarious evolution in the dynamics of humans and natural systems has become a vital aspect of the Anthropocene, creating irregular planetary conditions and driving a post-human sensibility. Cities are radically motivating a systemic change in ecological as well as cultural systems that operate with strong material dependencies on urban centers or precincts, which are often the historic cores of inclusive sites of inhabitation, abandonment, governance, and maintenance. While these transitions of urban precincts also emerge from complex histories of colonization, ruination, and urbanization, we observe that sites of these heritage infrastructures fabricate issues of inequalities, ecological distortions, and climatic uncertainties. Thus, we then ask questions of the coming age that hope to engage with the relationalities of localized economies, ecology, and equity.
While recalibration of these heritage infrastructures also produce opportunities for repairing broken orders and disrupted components of urban historical ecologies and responding to social economic inequalities, in what ways does it contribute to shaping urban regeneration in our cities by means of design and strategy? What are these expert systems or hybrid emergent systems that establish relational identity between humans and new hybrids of the environment, namely energy and community? To examine these criticalities, we work through a methodology of gradations, where the first gradation informs concepts of historic urban landscape approach with architecture in the Anthropocene and traces the export systems. The second witnesses introduction of the case of Kesarbagh in Lucknow, India, in context of the issue of broken environmental orders and disrupted urban ecologies due to colonization. And the third introduces agrotech, a hybrid design model to address transitions in energy as well as manage challenges of localized economies with innovation and technology.
So, starting with gradation 1, processes of urbanization. Urbanization across the planet has produced textured architectural inadequacies. Cities, the primary convolutes of urban heritage, possess unique metabolisms that define the resources, flows, stocks, inputs, production or consumption, and other binaries of survival. Patterns of infrastructural developments with incisions of the Anthropocene non-mutating local ecosystems, migratory progressions, and various ecological problems like deteriorating air quality, urban heat island effect, urban health, agrarian dislocation, and loss of local food familiarity have given rise to the abandoned and mutated architectural systems, infrastructures, and urban forms that we today call contemporary heritage. This heritage bear deep-rooted histories in situated practices and contested politics that impact the urban ecologies of cities. While UNSDG goals correspond to the challenges of dealing with such chain of assemblages, especially with goals 6, 7, and 11, they lie deficient in dealing with post-political climate governance. Achieving a truly compatible, sustainable development that not only prioritizes mode of economic development over environmental and social, but is also compatible with contemporary patterns of production, consumption, and distribution. Peg Ross' work on the concepts of reflexive relational architectural ecologies, identifying material, cultural, social, and political as largely impacting the natural ecologies. Guittari proposes emergent natural technological ecologies that are comprehensive of an ecosophy, which is a more socio-political approach meant to dismantle integrated world capitalism. It proposes that infrastructure as an open-ended, transforming and unfinished actor of urban life can inform three ecological registers: social, mental and machinic or socio-technical, and then only can it radically lead to a truly sustainable development. These ideas also coincide with the UNESCO HUL approach that builds on culture-led regeneration strategies, recognizing distinctive complex elements of the local context. It deals with nature-culture dichotomies and requires one to deal with administrative challenges in areas of heritage and in cities. Foregrounding natural and cultural genes of these cores, this approach forwards us to identify toolkit for systematic developments in the city impacting environmental vulnerabilities, namely vacancy, inhabitation, and maintenance of heritage infrastructures. Excessive building densities, loss of public spaces, social isolation, urban poverty, and climate change show that urban heritage has been rapidly mismanaged, threatening local identities. While the toolkit offers a perspective towards regulatory systems and planning initiatives, it does not define the method of application to complexities beyond indications of preservation, conservation, and maintenance. So, hereby I give the dais to my co partner.
This is where we introduce three hybrid emergent systems or expert systems that respond to detailed complexities at grassroots levels. architectural systems, ecological systems, and energy systems. They chart a clear methodology to tackle the infrastructure milieu and trace future developments of future directions of developments that tie relational ecologies at the levels that you can see. To demonstrate these integration of systems, we take the case of Kesabag and its colonial history as a complex political, social, and heritage structure and its associated contestations. Wajid Ali Shah's Kesabag was an eclectic and most heteronormative palace complex developed by Wajid Ali during his reign as the Nawab of Oudh in 1848 to 1850. As soon as it saw it advance in 1949 as a paradise on earth, Wajid had envisioned it, the more swiftly it was taken down by the Britishers during the Siege of Mutiny in 1857, merely within a decade of its proficient making. What lies ahead of mutiny for Kesabag is to be a one of a kind transformative urban heritage structures that formulate a hybrid typology of spatial complex for the urban core of Lucknow along Gomti. The painting that you saw was a classic watercolor depicting the performative follies, memorials, and grand gardens that intersect each other informally in this square complex. Wajid, a great patron of poetry and romance, favored the construction of an eclectic court with most of his administration in the hands of women and eunuchs. During his reign, color, celebration, and culture of food were at the heart of life, and this is from where botanical cultural heritage of Lucknow originates. Wajid Ali Shah's Kesar Bagh was a place of experimentation, innovation, and inclusion. Its diversity, heteronormative formations, and non-radical compositions made it a place for co-evolving multiple identities, unique connections, relations, and meanings. It turned Lucknow into a place where infrastructure intersected ecology, pavilions, vineyards, ornamental objects in landscape, inclusive structures for plants and animal species, pools, nehers, and extensive water systems developed to support the most vibrant and rich food heritage that one could find in Asia in the 18th century. This is an original map of 2023 where you can see a lot of botanical species that have been preserved and they still continue and they were a part of Wajid Ali Shah's Kesar Bagh. While the garden is not that anymore because it is divided into a butler park and some other minuscule parks, but the map is comprehensive of all the different kind of species that exist today. Veena Talwar Oldenburg writes the most detailed description of how Kesabag was debased, owing to its eclectic architecture. Wajid's taste was labeled as vulgar and obscene, and cultural diversity of an urban precinct was destroyed by incisions or attack lines, targeted to disseminate the city's complexity and replace it with cleanliness and order. What comes after the colonial act of dissemination are territories of conflicts, and land patterns undefined and debated between talukadars, the then Nawabs, Lucknow Development Authority, ASI, UP government, and British India Association. So this map that you see is Kesabag converted completely from a palace complex to now having Havelis and other contested areas, which I think on the right you can see how different parts are under different ownerships and a lot of common areas are politically contested. Havelis are still under consideration as to whether they should be preserved, whether they should be converted into hotels or boutique hotels or given for other purposes. And then we come to the vibrant water systems because during Wajid's time, he had constructed a very systematized water system, which considered acceleration, collection, waste management, and distribution, which is now overlapped with contemporary modes of these systems of ecologies. And Kesabag today is a mix of abandoned infrastructure, ruined Havelis, which are housing people formally, informally, and because Nawabs are not able to pull off enough money to renovate them, there are contestations who would take it up. The ASI cannot take it up, and the government, and it doesn't belong to the government, and the Nawabs are unable to give it to the government. They're not ready to do that. So there are a lot of political contestations of various Havelis happening, and one such case is Salimpur House. Where we see that the forecourts of these Havelis are actually being used by all the public that is there. And the parks are also public spaces, common spaces. Now, what happens is that we move to a design strategy or a utopian idea of what could be Kesabag if we could do various installations that can empower all the farmers and botanists who are working in the area to do something with the botanical species in the park. And therefore, we have multiple installations that you can see, public toilets that get integrated with Salimpur House eventually. Can we move on to the next? Forecourts of Salimpur House, and we work with the existing infrastructure. We work with all the collaborators, the tectonics of the Kothi, removing and yeah, okay. So yeah, that's it. I think I should just end it for you to just look at the methodology and how the design was envisioned, eventually considering all the layers, all the stakeholders, which are the farmers, the botanists, and basically considering everyone in the hierarchy to formulate something that can be done. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Ghazal and Parth.
Yeah.
Now we get back to Bhopal and look at the Boj wetlands. So, Shaurya?
Hello, everyone. A big thank you to IHS for giving me an opportunity to share my work. I am Shaurya Singh, and I'll be presenting my research that started as an undergraduate thesis at CEPT University, guided by Catherine Desai. South Asia is home to more than a fifth of the world's population, and it is dealing with some serious water problems. We are stuck in a cycle of floods and droughts, and UNICEF estimates that 68% of our water resources are now contaminated. Unfortunately, the Bhoj wetlands in Bhopal are facing a similar fate, and this research aims to shed light on the contemporary challenges that are driving its decline. To give you a bit of a background on the Bhoj wetlands, it spans about 36 square kilometers. It was built in the 11th century by King Bhoj to meet the water needs of Bhopal. Fast forward to today, it is still a vital part of the city, supplying around 40% of Bhopal's drinking water needs. The wetland being ecologically so significant, it received a Ramsar site recognition in 2002, which means it's recognized as a wetland of national importance. My research focused on 14 edge conditions of the wetland, specifically in the transition zones, where the areas of the wetland meets the urban space. These transition zones are then grouped into 5 larger sections, and I'll briefly walk you through these today. Section 1 is productive practices. Farming has been a key practice around the Bhoj wetlands, especially in its catchment, thanks to the fertile soil that supports agriculture. This is an image of the catchment area. These are the streams that collect the water and then discharge it into the wetland. However, the excessive use of fertilizers like ammonium nitrate, urea, along with pesticides such as organophosphates is causing serious harm. These chemicals are leaching into the wetland, leading to algae overgrowth, depleting the oxygen levels, and endangering the aquatic life. Despite efforts from the Bhopal Municipal Corporation to encourage eco-friendly farming practices, many farmers continue to rely on these chemicals. Another prevalent practice is aquaculture. Fish farming has flourished in the region due to its ideal climate and water conditions. Yet, these essential fishing practices often operate outside the monitorings of BMC, Bhopal Municipal Corporation. Bangladesh's Fisheries Department warns that aquaculture poses several risks. It includes potential spread of diseases to the wild fish, disruption of local species if the farmed fish escape. And what you see in the picture here is one of the streams in the catchment that takes the water into the wetland, and all the antibiotics and all the hormones that are used to cultivate the fishes in these ponds, all these are now polluting the water in the wetland. Another prevalent practice is the water chestnut cultivation, also known as singhada. The government permits water chestnut farming in the lake's catchment area, but they encourage smaller ponds to not directly impact the wetlands ecosystem. However, during the research, unauthorized large-scale water chestnut cultivations were observed. This is at the airport road. And water chestnuts are very well documented for their significant negative impact on lake ecosystems because they tend to form these very thick mats of vegetation with deep roots that block sunlight from reaching the water. They can deplete oxygen levels, leading to fish mortality. They also trap organic material and silt, raising the sediment levels and creating idle breeding grounds for mosquitoes. This is a picture I took at the full tank level. So there's a jali wall, and through that I've taken this picture and to give you an idea at the scale at which it's happened, and it's not entirely monitored. Also, water chestnuts contribute to the growth of algae and duckweed, and during my research, they often appeared growing alongside the hyacinth and algal blooms, and this coexistence sort of raises questions about potential risks to public health, who are in turn consuming these crops. Impact of infrastructure and urban development. Khanu Gaon is a historic settlement on the shores of the upper lake, and it struggled with frequent flooding until 2005. And after a lot of complaints, BMC has built a retaining wall along the lake's edge to prevent the water from flooding the area. Something is very similar has happened at another edge where the VIP road is built. It's an important road bringing people from the airport into the city of Bhopal. However, the construction of both these retaining walls replaced the lake's soft edge with a steep drop, disrupting habitats for plants, animals, and migratory birds. Runoff from the road carrying oil and chemicals contaminated the water, harming the aquatic life. There are also concerns about soil erosion and sedimentation affecting the wetlands hydrology. There are other disruptions in the catchment area that have happened. So according to the draft master plan of 2031, it makes it crystal clear that major construction within the catchment area is not allowed. However, there's been relentless pressure from landowners, many of them being bureaucrats and politicians, and they often use their clout to push through development projects that shouldn't see the light of the day. Several land parcels along the Bhopal-Indore highway are now getting approvals left and right. A prime example would be the case of Chirayu Hospital, Bhopal's largest clinical facility. This is where it's located. It's in the catchment, very close to the wetlands edge. And this is a view you see from the street. Its construction has flattened the natural drainage streams that have historically fed the wetland. And to give you another example, in 2020, during the peak of the COVID-19 crisis, a time when every hospital bed counted, this largest COVID facility available kept getting flooded because it was just constructed and people realized that, okay, this wasn't the place meant for me. Residents with a 4-year decade history in this area noted a very visible absence of flooding incidents prior to the construction of these roads and these land parcels, but now the water levels rise every monsoon and they spill onto adjacent streets and buildings. Conservation of natural and manicured ecosystems. One of the edge is Van Vihar. It was established in 1959 as part of an eco-restoration effort and is actively managed by gardeners and conservationists. They plant species that enhance both the ecological health and the aesthetic appeal of that edge. While the control edges are well maintained for tourism and interaction, the wilder, untouched fringes offer the best habitats for biodiversity and migratory species. The region that undergoes seasonal flooding during monsoons, these floodplains are often dismissed as wastelands, but they're just as vital because they help manage the floods by acting as natural buffers. They filter pollutants, improve the water quality. They are also home to many species that rely on shallow waters for breeding and survival. They serve as essential feeding and nesting grounds for migratory birds, creating a thriving ecosystem. It's important to see these transition zones as a crucial part of the wetland and not separate or less important. Urban infrastructure, this is another analysis that you can see. So E is the full tank level, and then you have the floodplains, the green buffer, the agriculture lands, and then the urban settlements. Urban infrastructure and pollution. Another pressing issue is the unchecked sewage being dumped directly into the lake. Private developers are often responsible for these uncontrolled pipes. Employees at the Bhopal Municipal Corporation, whom I interviewed, confirmed that they are aware of this problem but are yet to take action on it. It is alarming that the government is ignoring an issue which is happening in broad daylight. Based on my site interviews and observations, I was able to identify 23 sewage discharge points, some of which were based on informed guesses. However, a report from National Green Tribunal discovered more than 40 that are discharging waste into the lake, and this report was more than a decade old, so now there could easily be more. Impact of recreational activities. So this is the boating club. It is the place where everyone in Bhopal goes to hang out. And naturally, it gives a lot of opportunities to interact with the water. The motorboats that leak oil and grease into the upper lake are banned by the BMC and also the Pollution Control Board. However, during a brief survey that I took, most of these diesel-powered motorboats were responsible for leaking oil into the wetland. So in October 2023, the National Green Tribunal stepped in and banned all the motorboats in the upper lake. And the next time I visited the site, which was just the next month, all the cruise boat and motorboat operations were shut down, and you can only see rowing and paddle boats. The Contemporary Transition Zone study also shed light on a critical governance issue, because for 3.5 decades now, Bhopal has been without a sanctioned master plan. And that means that there's been no vision, no clear direction. We have had no structure to govern the expansion of the city and also our natural assets. Without a comprehensive plan, we are just simply letting the city's natural resources to fall apart. Previously, a 2031 master plan was proposed, but it faced significant objections from citizens due to its lack of clarity and inadequate provisions for the city's environment. So now that plan also is scrapped, and efforts are now underway to develop a new master plan for 2047. Given the state of the wetland, there is a dire need for its conservation. There was, however, a very extensive conservation project spanning close to a decade from 1995 to 2004, headed by the Housing and Environment Department. It was funded by the Japan Bank of International Cooperation. And in some ways, it was that conservation project that pushed the Bhoj wetlands to receive the Ramsar designation in 2002. And a lot of issues that I came across during my study coincide with the ones that were addressed then. Some of them being agricultural encroachments near the upper lake, impact of idle immersion on water quality, making new spill channels to connect various dams, water chestnut practices. The weed is back. There was a very huge process that led the way of removing all the hyacinth from the water, but now we're back to square one. The Upper Lake Boating Club, it was a yacht club in 1968, but now it is expanded. And the edge conditions were much more softer before, but now we've replaced them with retaining walls. Bhopal's Upper Lake is a critical water source for 1.9 million of its residents. It influences the local climate, vegetation, and groundwater. It's a habitat for over 2,500 migratory birds. This isn't just some lake. It's the reason 40% of the city can turn on their taps and expect clean water to flow. The conservation project funded by the Japan International Bank worked great at first because the water quality became a lot better. But then we took the foot off the pedal, and the silt is back, the weeds are back, and our infrastructure systems are basically assaulting the wetland with sewage and pollution. We have the documentation. What we need isn't just one-off intervention. We need a revolution in how we think about these wetlands. We have to replace those rigid artificial boundaries and waterfront typologies with dynamic solutions that work with nature and not against it. First we need real-time monitoring systems. We can't solve problems until they're not measured. Most of the issues I identified are not recognized by the BMC. Second, we need flexibility in managing the lake. Nature is constantly changing and our strategies need to adapt. Third, collaboration would be key. The BMC, EPCO, and local communities must work together towards shared goals, because at this point, we can't really afford a quick fix that looks good on paper, but falls apart in practice. Thank you so much. There's a lot of data and research that has gone behind supporting each argument. So if anyone is interested to know about it in more detail, I'll be happy to share the paper. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thanks, Chaurya. So now we're going to open up questions, and we'll alternate between the physical audience here and online if there are any. So be brief in your questions and identify the speaker to whom the question is meant for. So
Hello, I'm coming from IIT Tirupati. We have worked closely with ISER Tirupati. So in our module on biodiversity, I did a case study on Miyawakis of Tirupati. So a question was posed to me by our biodiversity faculty that do we really need urban forest? Like for example, the landscape of Tirupati, the native landscape is a shrubby and bushy one. Do we really need to make these urban forests? This is my question for Charlotte.
I think, yeah, like you pointed out, I've also seen some afforestation projects in Hyderabad where the proponents of Mewaki forest often claim that they are creating natural forests, which mimics its ecosystem, but it's really, like you mentioned, the terrain there, it's in the Deccan Plateau and it's just not the natural terrain, let's say. And also we need to think about other, like, for example, if you're creating a forest, like how is it in tune with its environment? What kind of water supply would then be required, right? And other challenges, I've written a whole other chapter on how the residents of the neighborhood then interact in very densely populated areas, right? How would they then interact with the space? I think it raises really larger ethical questions on livability and who gets to live well in these spaces. To put it very bluntly, of course, a lot of residents complain about the snakes in the forest, and there's often a source of contestation between residents in the neighborhood. I think that sort of answers your question, and I'm also curious to chat more about the forest in Tirupati. So let's catch up later.
thank you. Any online question? I can't see any, so we can go to the next audience question.
Hi, thank you so much. This is for Sanjana. My research is also somewhat in Bangalore's lakes, and I'm curious for you how you see this as an urban issue or something that is transcending beyond to rural issues as well, and whether there is even a binary there right now. I mean, I'm thinking about projects like the KC Valley or HN Valley now that are kind of transcending these boundaries and putting pipes and kind of breaking apart the whole ecosystem entirely. And so I'm wondering if you see the work that you're doing and the studies into these lakes as being very relevant, especially as the city expands or to places outside Bangalore.
Yeah. I would say first, thank you for your question. But I've actually worked, outside of my research, I've worked with some communities in Nagarhole Forest, which is a tiger reserve, for example. A lot of the issues that they face is very similar because I see conservation models remain the same, and it tends to pit the local communities against and I see those conceptions of, for example, we have ecotourism, which is allowed, but then the local populations have to be displaced and they have to move out of the forest, right? So, and again, you have a displacement of local populations, and I see, that's probably going to happen throughout. And I get completely, especially now in Bangalore, you even talk about some of the areas in Chikballapur, Dodballapur, etc. I don't know where you draw the boundaries of what ends up being Bangalore, what's not. So yeah, I definitely see wherever we're considering this is, I feel there's a lot of relevance to forests, to peri-urban areas, to villages. Yeah.
I can just quickly add something.
Sure.
I just quickly wanted to add a point which is very essential to note, that a lot of these urban forests are also created from compensatory afforestation funds from elsewhere. And I missed that point in my presentation, but that's something that also answers your question. Why are these urban forests required is, a question in the very first place. Yeah.
So if we don't have any more online questions and any other questions, then maybe we can close. So I just want to point out a couple of things that emerged from this. Very wonderful diversity of topics, and also the complexity of urban ecology as a field. and for all of us who are interested in pursuing this, the challenge is going to be to put the ecology into political ecology, because often and the political aspects are there, but the ecological aspects are not there. Similarly, when people are looking at the biophysical and ecological mechanisms or ecology in the city, um, it's if it's not embedded in the political economy or the political ecological aspects, then that also weakens the contribution to finding solutions for socially just conservation. And cities are highly contested spaces and also more complex. So when everybody was pursuing conservation in the semi-wild areas, it was on public land, state-owned land, and it was about the burden of conservation being placed on people who were taking the brunt, and they were not getting as much benefit out of that. That was the sort of discourse on the political ecology side. Here in the city, we have the state, we have so-called civil society, citizens, private sector. So it's actually a much more complex arena for ecology and conservation. And so I also want to point out that throughout the day today, we have many other talks which are on nature-based solutions, sustainability, and ecology. So today, the flavor of the day is ecology and sustainability. So please be there for all of these different sessions. And thank you, everybody, for this very giving us food for thought. And let's go for our tea break. Thank you, everybody.